With the full base set of Elestrals finally revealed, I wanted to make this video series discussing every single card in there. I'm organizing this by element and then finally generic cards, so that'll be 6 total videos. In each video, I'll be discussing each of the cards that I group in those elements / generic, and I'll be going over my general thoughts of those cards, its meta viability both in base set as well as in the future, and some fun factors about the card, because I really want to highlight that even if it's not meta, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do about it at the casual scene. So if this interests you, let's get right into it. Wind is a super splashable element as it's got some phenomenal 1-drops that cover some of the weaknesses of other decks. And as such, there are really only 3 cards I want to highlight first in this discussion, and that's Soarlet, Aeromare, and Peagust, because these are the 3 most splashable cards. So I figured it makes sense to start with it, and I want to talk about Soarlet first. 5 attack is phenomenal. Highest attack stat, hits over most one-spirit Elestrals in the game, and it even has a really nice effect letting it hit over so many other stuff, and that's just simply to expend 1 wind to change the position of a non-wind enchanted Elestral. And yeah, that's especially when wind's so splashable right now, and there's a lot of other primary elements running around. This Soarlet feels really good because it can pretty much just switch an Elestral to whatever position is most advantageous for Soarlet to hit over it. That is super powerful. So right now, meta viability, very meta for sure. Though I will say I do think that this card is one of the candidates to possibly drop off a bit more. If there's just too much wind flying around, Soarlet might not be as useful just because it can't target wind stuff. But as long it's going to be one of those cards that I think we'll see dips and rises throughout the meta, because if decks start seeing Soarlet less, then they might be inclined to run more of their elemental cards and Soarlet will come back. So it's definitely a really powerful card, even if it's not necessarily seeing as much play, just more meta calls and such. And that's going to happen with cards like these. In terms of future viability, especially as we get more elements and the individual elements get more kind of support and such and might rely less on this win package to cover up their weaknesses, I could definitely see Soarlet still popping up as just a phenomenal tool to easily switch stuff, whether it be side deck or main deck, doesn't really matter. I think it's going to live, depending on the deck, it's going to live in both, but I definitely think it's going to be a huge sideboard consideration for its ease of being able to hit over Elestrals as well. Just really powerful. And even then, at worst, you just misenchant it, and if you're under your basic stadium, it's now 6 attack as well, which is really good. And also of note, this card with a Thunder Spirit can hit over a Rice Rose if the Rice Rose has no defensive buffs. That's also a great use case for this card. So this card's just super versatile. And for fun strategies, this card's definitely want to see fun play as just an easy way to hit over stuff, to answer stuff with an attack, and also, of course, can be misenchanted for that 5 attack to get other bonuses. That is quite nice for this card. Moving over to Aeromare, this card, its effect really doesn't matter. It's just the highest 1-spirit stat total, 9 total, 4 attack, 5 defense. It's just phenomenal. It comes 5 attack, 6 defense under stadiums. And because you don't really care about the enchantment, this is really, it's not even necessarily a wind Elestral at that point, because you can misenchant it and be perfectly fine. And that is what makes this card strong, especially with such a limited card pool. Sometimes it's just nice to throw into your deck a 4/5, because it just has phenomenal stat lines. So that's where I think this card has a lot of potential. Now, of course, it does have some potential with giving Elestral protection effects on your Ascension stuff, so that's quite nice for the future. I think that's more of a win-focused strategy, as it does have to be properly enchanted for it. Right now, there really isn't too many cards that really have that payoff for it, and most of them either want protection from counter runes or just protection overall, because we have kind of an even balance between counter rune destruction, rune Elestral destruction, and then Elestral effect, Elestral destruction as well. So just having one doesn't always feel like enough. It's just a bit too slow of a card as well. So I think that part really just is more for future decks and such that want to see it. So in terms of meta viability, I think this card is super meta right now because of its just phenomenal stat line. And in terms of future viability, this card will fall off as elements get better tools. But we also have some new elements getting introduced, so depending on how many cards they get, Aeromare might pop up in those lists as well, just to round out those lists. I think it's just a phenomenal Elestral to round off lists. If you have all the effects you need, you just need a good stat line. In terms of fun viability, super fun card for that stat line, and for its effect as well, I do think it'll enable some fun Ascension shenanigans to protect your Elestrals from stuff that will be a lot of fun. Moving over to Peagust here, the final one. Doesn't have an amazing stat line, but it's also a really simple way to remove runes, because until Peagust leaves the board, you technically haven't used any spirits. So I quite like it. It's definitely not the best card, as it has very little board impact, but right now with counter runes being very impactful right now, this can be a phenomenal tempo card, as if you kind of answer your opponent's Celestial with a counter rune on your turn, on your opponent's turn, and your opponent has one, you can just throw down Peagust and better secure your tempo yourself. And that is quite nice. So it just feels like it's the right time for an Elestral like this one to exist with this kind of trade that's been going on, the kind of back and forth trade between you and your opponent, and you just kind of need those counter runes to really swing the tempo in your favor or catch up on tempo, and Peagust can disrupt that really easily. So in terms of meta viability right now, I think it's very meta, but kind of like Soarlet. Actually, I shouldn't even say kind of like Soarlet. I do think that this card really isn't as going to be as widely used, just because sometimes the more efficient way to deal with counter runes is just to attack into it. But if your deck really wants to keep your opponent off your counter runes and not have your tempo disrupted, I think Peagust is a really great fit. And for future viability, I could see this card if the meta slows down. I don't know, or if a deck really needs some rune destruction, but I definitely think giving up your normal chance a big ask for a subpar body, and that's going to hurt this Celestial in the long run. I don't even know if it really sees side deck play too much. It could, but I think Thunderstorm in the long run has a lot more potential being a rune. So I think it's more just the state of this meta that makes this card really strong. And of course, for fun strategies, again, just a simple destruction effect does help out with that one. And I think this also has some potential in fun strategies, because it's just when it receives a spirit, maybe move around some spirits to just move your opponent's back row. That definitely has some potential there. But yeah, overall, I do think Peagust is more just one of those cards that feels really great right now because of the limited card pool. But I think overall will just fall more into a niche as time goes on. So these three cards just, I feel like, make such a great splashable package to round off stuff. What else does Wind have to offer? Well, I wanted to cover these cards next: Exaltair, Bag of Winds, Island of Aeolia, Carryon, and the final one would be Fowlicane. Or I guess I should also throw Tornado in here as well. So starting off with Exaltair here, this one, just if you've seen anything online, people will always see Exaltair, so bird go burr, because it does. Just being able to burn your opponent for 2 spirits, pretty much just by moving stuff around, is really great. Though I will say this is a very high skill intensive card. It's not the best stat line, so you really need to know when to throw it down. And you can really clinch games with that by going over the top, burn your opponent for 2. Maybe you just answer something and you can throw this down, move some spirits around, and attack. Really deal 5 spirits in a turn. It has a lot of output. It's just certainly not something that you can easily splash, and I think it's going to be more of a focus around, because it really can't answer the board. It's just a great way to clean things up at the end of the game. So I think it definitely has some potential in Wind decks that like to do that. And of course, Wind has Aeolus. That helps make these cards super accessible, easily searchable. So I definitely think that also has a lot of synergy with Exaltair as well. So in terms of meta, I just don't think it's very meta right now, just because it doesn't have a big impact on board. I think it will be more in like fringe stuff, because I just think Wind by itself isn't too remarkable right now. I think Wind is just better splashed into other stuff personally. But I think it definitely has some potential moving forward as Wind gets more, I don't want to say cohesive pieces, but it really feels like Wind has decent cards, but they just don't quite push into making a good Wind meta deck personally. So I think it just needs some more support. I could definitely Exaltair benefiting from that. Again, that's just a great way to go over the top. And for fun strategies, phenomenal fun card. Just throwing down these next scene around spirits, burning your opponent for a ton. If you can protect them, that's going to be fun. And I see more ways to protect them. So watch out for this fun strategy. And even though I definitely think that Exaltair isn't the best card for the meta, always keep this one in mind, because I can definitely see times where your opponent might just drop this if they're running a Wind package, burn you for 2 and you're not ready for it, because the spirit kind of grind of this game is slow enough where these cards can be very devastating in the late game. I list Bag of Winds here because it's another way to nexus with Exaltair, which I think is super important, because Aeolus is also really expensive. Bag of Winds is on its own a decent card, just extra 2 defense and then a protection effect against runes is really good. I just don't think there's too much that really benefits from it right now. It's still just easy to work around this kind of card overall, even though I do think rune protection is one of the best effects right now. So All in all, I think it's one of those cards. Oh, yeah, and the Destroy Rune, it's nice. I just don't think it's ever going to be too relevant. So right now, it's an interesting card to keep in mind. I just don't think it's too relevant. There's nothing that really can utilize this effect to great success. And it's not a problem with the card, but rather what cards might want it. So meta viability, I don't think it's very meta right now. Future viability, I do think it has future viability. I do really like that protection effect there. And for fun strategies, it's great for Exaltair burn, extra targets there for win stuff, and also just some shenanigans to protect your Elestrals. Stuff like what Wirtz is trying. Though he focuses around Leonite, which doesn't need bag of wins, but this is like another component to it. If maybe you have stuff that with other protection effects and such as Majesty is a perfect example, where he has Elestral protection effects. Want a bag of wins, maybe. I do quite like that. I think the only thing holding this card back is that the removal right now as well. You got Shield that doesn't target, Poison Tip Arrow, which will hit an Elestral before bag of wins can be equipped. That also holds it back. That lends more towards future potential as we get more removals that bag of wins does answer. Island of Aeolia is also listed here because of Exaltair for some easy Nexus targets, but also because I definitely think if you're trying to build a win deck, Island is quite nice. Your Elestrals do hit good numbers generally, and you can easily search out your Soarlets and Aeromares and such, but just being able to knock out your opponent's stand, which is how a lot of opponents' Elestrals will catch up or get slightly ahead, and just kind of secure being ahead, is quite nice. And again, for like Exaltair decks, it's another Nexus target, which is also fun. So for meta viability, I don't think this card's very meta right now because it's more of a splashable package. So they're there more for their effects and just decent stat lines. And a lot of times you can misenchant them anyway, such as Aeromare and Soarlet, meaning that you don't need Island of Aeolia. You can use any Stadium Rune for whatever fits whatever deck you're playing best. So not meta right now. Moving forward, though, I do see some potential for this card if we can build a win deck, but at the same time, like all stadiums, I imagine these one or two defensive differences will matter less and less over time. And I imagine we're going to get more specialized stadiums for specific decks that might be run over this one. So it's one to keep in mind, but I do think that there will be better ones later on. And the same thing goes for fun strategies. If you really need the extra stats, this card's going to be nice. But again, I think more specialized stadiums will come out as well that might lend more to whatever strategy you're wanting to use. Moving over to Carryon here, I think this is a phenomenal side deck card. Maybe not right now, but in future metas, because its ability to crash and take an Elestral just kind of helps you kind of clean up boards sometimes. It won't be perfect, depends on what Elestrals your opponent has, but it's nice to have that option for sure. Just an interesting disruption tool for when that can be searched out with Aeolias. Seems quite nice here. Meta right now, I don't think so. I think in a one-on-one Spirit Exchange, it doesn't really matter too much. You have Elestrals that can more readily answer like Soarlet, but I think as we get more bigger threats, that this card could become more interesting, or maybe some Swarm strategies going wide. This card can become more interesting in the long run. That is just my opinion on this one overall. So yeah, meta not right now. Future meta viability, I could see this being like a tech card against some strategies if you really need something to help clear up their board or some disruption. It's a bit of an awkward one admittedly, so I think there'll also be better ones that come out, but until we get those, this card is an interesting option. And for fun strategies, I'm mostly waiting for this one to make a really dumb fun strategy of disrupting your opponent's stuff. So I think this one's definitely going to be one to watch out for, like a fun killer type strategy, just disrupting what your opponent can do, and that's going to be really, really interesting. Fowlicane here I think is a way more interesting card that probably will see some sideboard play, at least in the future. Its ability just to nuke all the runes is really powerful, because if your opponent doesn't have an answer to this right away that gets rid of it before it ascends or even on ascension, your opponent doesn't have any way to answer it, and you can just kind of get rid of whatever they can that can stop Fowlicane and start attacking over their stuff. And sure, it's pretty easy to answer it on your opponent's next turn through different card effects and such, but they still need those outs anyway. So I definitely see a lot of power in Fowlicane. But again, I just don't think it's super relevant right now because we're in such a grind game where it's more the one-on-one trades, and maybe forcing your opponent to use the spirits is a bit more efficient than destruction, but I definitely see some potential in the future once we move away from this kind of meta. So in terms of meta viability, not right now, but definitely has some fringe viability. In the future, I definitely think this has some good viability. Just nuking all the runes seems really strong to me, even without some protection effects. And for fun strategies, this I could see helping a lot of fun win decks, especially now that might struggle with the back row as like an option just to nuke it all. Seems pretty good to me. and even in the future. So I'd say definitely remember this card when facing up against wind, as you don't want to just all of a sudden lose your back row because you weren't paying attention to this card. Speaking of back row disruption, the last card in this group is Tornado here. One spirit just bounce rune back to your opponent's hand. I don't think this card is super great, but I definitely think it has some potential if you have like some big, strong OTK kind of strategy or big swing turn, and you just need to get rid of one rune on your opponent's board to stop them from disrupting it. Yeah, I can see this card seeing play. It's less expensive than Thunderstorm, but at the same time, outside of that exact scenario, this card just feels worse because your opponent just plays the rune next turn anyway, so maybe you get rid of a few spirits, but you're having to use one on your own, and if you're bouncing set runes, again, it just doesn't matter. Your opponent is just going to reset it, and you have to deal with it next turn anyway. And nothing's swingy enough to really justify the bounce versus just a hard removal. So in terms of meta viability, I don't think it's very meta right now. For future viability, I say definitely think about this card. That way you're not punished by it. Though honestly, if you have multiple sets, this card still doesn't do much. But still keep it in mind. And for fun strategies, I do think this will help some fun strategies that just need an easy bounce to make an explosive play. So again, it's just one of those cards that, remember, I don't think it's going to be super impactful, but I could see scenarios popping up where this card just, you forget about it, you sleep on it, and you will get punished by its effect. So yeah, pretty much just remember it. Moving away from those cards, we just have a collection of 3 Elestrals that kind of do various different things. So they're Peliquarius, Glydesdale, and Chrysoar. Peliquarius, it's a synergy with the water deck. There really isn't too much of a water wind deck forming right now, so using your normal enchant on a meh stat line Elestral to search out a 1 spirit water, really slow right now, not very great. Could see play if we get like a good combo or maybe stall, control, water wind deck that can afford that 1 turn. That's a possibility, it just doesn't exist yet. So for meta viability, not meta right now. Future viability, it would need to be in the right meta, but it does have some. Searching out 1 water spirit still good. It just would need to be in a water wind deck, which really limits the Celestial. And then for fun viability, anytime we get a water wind fun deck, I definitely think this card may be a consideration. It's just, again, a matter of can you afford the normal enchant per turn to search it out. So keep this one in mind for water wind. It's an interesting one. I don't think it'll have too much of an impact, but it's there. It's a nice card for sure, just to have access to. Glydesdale here is an interesting Ascension card. It doesn't really feel like it fits into much right now. It's more of the fun territory, but being able to buff it by 5 attack, that's interesting to easily hit over stuff. Don't know if it'll be too relevant right now or if it ever will be. It can be, so that's nice to have. And I think the more interesting is the being able to attack twice when empowered by an Aeromare. So this requires some setup, and I think this is why this card, even for a fun strategy, feels not the best right now, because you need to get an Aeromare on board, stick it, and then be able to ascend. It just needs some extra support to more readily get that Aeromare, either allow Aeromare to ascend over Glydesdale or get Aeromare to empower it somehow. Because then you've got an Elestral that can attack for upwards of 12 attack. Well, yeah, 12 attack on its own with Elestral protection that can attack twice per battle phase. That sounds like a lot of fun. So for meta viability, I think it's too big of an ask for setup. I don't think it'll ever be meta. I don't think it will, ever, so that's same for future viability, but I think this will be a phenomenal fun deck if we can just get more ways to keep an Aeromare on board to ascend the Glydesdale, assemble those pieces. This is going to be really fun for that. Moving over to Chrysoar here, 8 attack, or this ascension of Soarlet, by the way, and Glydesdale is the ascension of Aeromare. So Chrysoar, phenomenal attack at 8. That hits over most 2s, or really all, well, at least crashes or hits over most, if not all, 2s, at least from an attack stat wise. But in terms of its effect, being able to attack the spirit deck directly is pretty neat, just to be able to hit him for 2. Unfortunately, that's not a huge swing, and it's such a grind game right now, but it's an interesting card if you just need to plop it on board and win the game with that. That's pretty neat. Though it's also interesting because with 8 attack, it can hit over most stuff as well, so I don't know how often you want to just attack the spirit deck directly versus just attacking to their Elestral. But at the same time, being able to recover 2 wind whenever it deals damage to your opponent is quite nice for sustainability. So maybe like a mid-range wind deck like this card, just be get some recovery, may answer the board, or may send an attack phase to just get some extra spirits, survive a bit longer, hit a bit hard, may have some protection around it. Could be interesting, but I do think it's a bit conflicting that as a high attack stat and can attack directly. but at the same time, it's versatility, so it's not too bad either. It's hard for your opponent to answer with attacks as well. So that's also quite nice. We don't have to rely on card effects as well. So meta, I don't think it'll be ever meta. Fringe, yes. I could definitely see a win deck just maybe plopping one of these in from time to time. Not in this meta, but probably like in future metas that might be a bit slower just to kind of close out a game, or even a bit faster just to close out some games. And for fun, I think this card definitely lives in the fun space, just a way to poke your opponent, recover some. It's an interesting card, and I think that's where it will really see some play. Finally, I want to cover Nimbug, Cirrucoon, and Stratomoth, as they're just kind of their own little package of cards. Nimbug lets you expend 1 to ascend into Cirrucoon from your hand or deck, so pretty self-explanatory there. Meta, well, you know what, I'm going to rate all these all at once, because they all kind of tie in together. Cirrucoon here, not the best defense, but hard for Wind Spirits to hit over, so if you can open a Nimbug, that's quite nice. So as long as Cirrucoon survives a turn, you can expend open to ascend straight to Stratomoth. That's getting a 3-spirit out is really powerful. It does cost a lot though, but if you can get that Nimbug on turn 1, just keep the Cirrucoon on, you're going straight to Stratomoth, and that's going to be pretty powerful. So Stratomoth here, not the best stat line, but it does have a way to gain attack for each Nimbug and Cirrucoon in the field in the Underworld. So really it comes out as an 11 attacker, which isn't too bad, especially if your opponent has had time to catch up with their 3 spirits. And then of course the ability just to expend a wind to return each of your opponent's runes to their hand means this card is hard to get disrupted unless you catch it on enchant. So this card is super swingy, and it's got the support to be able to set it up. Aeolia lets you search out Nimbug, so it's not that hard to actually gather these cards. The problem is that I think Cirrucoon is just a bit too easy to deal with. It has no protection, so it takes is a card effect to be able to deal with it, because it does have to wait till the draw phase of the following turn, and I think that really hurts this deck. So in terms of meta viability, unfortunately, I don't think it's that meta. I think it's too easily to answer, even though Stratomoth honestly has a really powerful effect. In terms of future meta viability, and this is for all the cards, by the way, maybe if it sees some support, but at the same time, we might get more ways to answer them. Again, Stratomoth doesn't have much protection. It's really expensive, so you're really playing the game of, does my opponent have the answer? So maybe if we get more ways to protect it, yeah, it definitely sounds really great. But without it, I just think it's a very high roll deck that I think will live mostly in the fun space. And as a fun deck, it's a lot of fun. Just trying to high roll into Stratomoth and beat your opponent with a great effect. Just get rid of your opponent's disruption tools, make their counter runes. Yeah, that's going to be fun. And I could definitely see these cards maybe getting some insect type support based on their attribute later on. That will really make these a really fun deck to build and continually upgrade. I know it's one of Dan's favorites since he is the bug maniac for sure. So I do quite like Stratomoth, even if it's just meant to be fun, but hey, fun decks are really important for a game, and I love seeing a fun deck like Stratomoth exist. So that is it for Wind. I think especially out of base set, it's mostly just the Soarlet, Aeromare, Peagust, which are great splashable cards, but definitely has some interesting cards for some fun decks, so maybe some sideboard decks, not sideboards decks, sideboards in certain decks, mainly like the Fowlicane. So it definitely feels like one of those that isn't necessarily bottom tier, but it's just fair almost as a mono deck as well. So it definitely needs some more support. But hey, it's nice that we have an element that can help patch up certain other decks, and also has some synergies with stuff like Thunder as well with their Volt Tempest combo. But if you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment down below if you agreed or disagreed with any of these cards. I love the conversation as it helps me develop my opinions more. This is just my opinion. I can be right, I can be wrong. This is just my impression for right now. If you've missed some of my other parts, I'll have a playlist linked above, well, in a card above and in the description down below. And of course, at the time of this releasing, there should be one more part to come out. So please subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you're notified when I upload that part, as well as any other future content, because I'm having a blast making these videos and I hope you are enjoying. So look forward to more content coming out real soon.